Yes, so in preparation of this lecture, I thought, what context do I actually want to place this site in? So at which scale? And that theme of context has come up a few times. And I think that is because as it stands, the site is offering us so many different themes and agendas. And a lot of these are going to be much refined during the post-ex program. But I think we can already see that it is going off in very many different directions. Even just looking at the Iron Age itself, there is a lot that is going to be really, really interesting to find out more about. And I think in terms of the Iron Age, it is actually one of the placed or located in one of the most interesting areas of Ireland currently. So I'm going to focus therefore primarily on the area around Roscommon and Sligo. I'm going to dip a little bit into adjacent counties, into Leitrim, Donegal, and a bit of Mayo occasionally. But I think it is really a landscape in which, through the research of, well, what is at this point the past 50, 70 years or so, I would say, we have assembled a huge array of information and sites that allow us now to start creating a picture of life in the Iron Age that is really unprecedented in any other part of the country. And this links in with the various themes that we see represented at Gortnacrannagh, and I'm sure my pronunciation of the site is not right. I've been trying to mimic what I heard there, but I'm doing my best. So yeah, standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, we have had a number of long-standing research projects in the area, in Galway in particular, around Roughcrohan. We had National Museum projects around Loch Gara we are going to see later, and a variety of different investigations of different types of sites and monuments that we find all represented here in this area. If we go back in Iron Age research into the year 1994, you're probably all familiar with this map here from Barry Raftery's Pagan Celtic Ireland. You can see the area we are talking about today here has a good few of these dots of the material culture that is kind of emblematic for the Iron Age in Ireland and elsewhere, which is metalwork, stone objects decorated in the La Tène style. And this part of the world, or this part of the country, has been part of those regions in Ireland that actually did produce metalwork and other types of objects decorated in this style. So part of the La Tène using areas of Ireland, if you want, whereas there were other parts of the country where there was a kind of notable absence. So here the Castle Strange stone, one of the really magnificent items of stonework decorated in this La Tène style in this part of the country. But still, one of the fundamental problems that we have had in trying to understand the Iron Age is how this material, which is still very sparse, if you consider that it used to represent the Iron Age as such, this distribution has now been shown to be a very, very biased and unrepresentative reflection of life in the Iron Age. And it's the various sites that have been documented through excavation, through geophysical surveys, and through the recent TRI schemes that are now showing us the context and the daily lives of the people that produce these items of La Tène material culture. And just to show you here one of the most important items that we have within Ireland, that happens to come from County Roscommon, which is perhaps one of the most important ones because it gives us an earliest date for the appearance of this Latin style of decoration in around the 3rd century BC, and is linking us in importantly with the international Latin style using world on the continent in particular, where we find talks of the type here from Knock that you see in the drawing here, again from Barry Raftery's book there on the right, and a detailed photograph here on the left, decorated in this art style and also conforming with an idea of neck ornament that we also find in the continent. We are also fortunate to have now some of the earliest directly dated items made of iron that allow us to start to talk about the beginnings of this period. And again, one of the early dated items comes from County Roscommon, from the River Suck, and it is here with a radiocarbon date, placing it somewhere between the 8th and the 4th century BC. So early beginnings, Roscommon, Sligo, the areas we are in here, when we're looking at the broader context of Gortnacrannagh, they are right in there, they're engaged in the earliest stages of the emergence of what we understand now to be the Iron Age in this country. If we go slightly further afield, we see more examples of that, documenting that also in slightly later stages in the kind of 1st century BC. The famous sword hilt from Ballyshannon, again a very international type of sword hilt, and a vessel, bronze vessel from County Leitrim, from Keshcarrigan. These are items that are not everyday consumption items, but they are items that were deposited in wet places, primarily either directly off the coast or in a river again, as probably offerings, and the use of these kind of exotic items in this is probably really important. We also, however, have started to realize over the last decades that it's not just these international styles that were important to people in this period to express status and probably identity as well, but we also have local forms of ornament, such as these ribbon torques, like the one found on the County Mayo coast from New York, with bronze bracelets and amber beads, a find that Mary Cahill of the National Museum is working on, and in the finding of which she was involved. So I've nicked these slides from her Twitter. An amazing type of gold neck ornament that is distinctly local. It is not Latin. Here's somebody saying something about themselves that is not saying, I know the people in France and I'm kind of related to them, but I'm well connected, but this person or these people are saying something very different about themselves. And all of that at a time where we are starting to have then the emergence of places that also seem about the representation of communities of power, of, as Daniel just outlined to us, of the ability to command significant amounts of a labor force. Perhaps we have to envisage it less as a hierarchical society in which we have elite members at the top, but perhaps it is different communities in the wider neighborhood, in the wider vicinity, coming here together at these sites, Rathcroghan, or perhaps sites like Gortnacrannagh as well, and to perform certain rituals, conduct certain activities in particular type of contexts. So that is one of the interpretations that have been put forward in the past in the discussion of sites like Rathcroghan, Navan Fort, etc., which are just stunning in terms of their sheer size and monumentality. And I won't delve into the details now here of the structures. We already heard about this from Daniel. But I think the important thing here is that these sites are set in landscapes that again recall or emote, or I'm looking for a word here, that are giving us really strong hints of the different types of activities, arenas of lives that these sites are sat in. We have the enclosures and we have the funnel shapes, and this reconstruction drawing here is from a recent paper by Joe Fennick and John Waddell and it's on the cover of Emania, if I'm not mistaken. And they're visualizing here how the sites would have sat in a really busy landscape. And I think that is such an important element of this reconstruction. The funnels, the enclosures, they are there to structure movement, be it of livestock or of people. They are not just boundaries, but they are also structuring the way people move through these landscapes. That is a theme that we find, we saw the muklas being discussed there a moment ago, that we find in the immediate landscape around Rathcorrine itself, that we find a bit further up also in County Roscommon in the case of the Doon and or parts of the Black Pig Dyke. And I've again nicked an image here from the Black Pig Dyke project that shows you the various yellow bits of earthworks that we find in this general part of the world that show us that the structuring of the landscape is really one of the pervasive motifs and ideas that we find in this period. So Donegal we have also found as part of the road schemes by the TI, Mahagar Carr, is that how I pronounce it? I hope. A section of such a dike construction here around Roscommon. We have a number of examples. So the landscapes were heavily divided, and perhaps like the rivers, these divisions were less about creating boundaries necessarily, but about guiding movement and prescribing access and routes through these landscapes. The monumentality, the size of Rathcorrine itself is suggestive of this being not our everyday normal site. So we have elements like the procession way, like the avenues, the funnel-shaped structures at the entrance to the enclosure that seem to prescribe a route of access to the site itself. We have the earthworks in the landscape around it. We have the sheer size of the buildings. It was for a long time really difficult for us to understand how these sites fit or how they relate to the landscape around them in terms of people's life ways. How do people actually settle these landscapes around these sites? And again, the recent road schemes here, there's a number of them, have produced sites that go a long way to answer this question for us. So here's a site by AMS, excavated by AMS, not made by AMS, that is just northeast of Sligo. Is it the N16? Sorry, I'm bad with road numbers. And it's a palisaded enclosure, and it's located on the foothills of a mountain range, and that is something we find now to be really characteristic of these settlement sites as they emerge. Here an example kindly provided by IAC on the N4. A number of people in the audience worked on that scheme, actually, I believe, which has produced a very similar settlement site, a big palisaded enclosure with a big roundhouse at its center. And importantly, these are also sites that in many instances, or I shouldn't say many instances, we have a good number of these sites now, but we'd like some more, please. that has a long chronological trajectory as well. So stratigraphically, we can actually say that this ridge, and again, we are located here on a ridge, on a slight elevation in the landscape, that this site was settled at least in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Perhaps there's a bit of early activity as well. I believe from the pottery, we have something Neolithic as well. But in the Iron Age and all these structures here, in this multi-phase settlement here, this structure, the palisaded enclosure, they are all dated to the Iron Age, and we're working on the development of the chronological models for this. So we can now point to particular types of locations in these landscapes, which are elevations that very often are kind of difficult to grasp for us through, let's say, housing development or road developments, because they usually avoid elevations in the landscapes. So it is probably here in Sligo, but also in other parts of the country, probably that one of the reasons why we haven't found much evidence for the everyday settlement of the Iron Age is because we have been avoidant of the type of landscapes that these are found in, and they have little surface expression. So they're not like Roughcrohan with the mound or the burial monuments that attract the attention of research excavations. So it is through excavations in schemes like this that has produced Gortnacrannagh and these other sites here, that we find those parts of the Iron Age that are not monumental and that have a great potential to reveal the other aspects and allow us to tie everything together into more full and informative pictures of Iron Age life, and in turn allow us to reevaluate those aspects of the record that we have long known. If you look at this image here of Carrownagark, this pink feature here is a ring barrow. It is a ring ditch. It is a burial monument that is here at this site, its latest stage. So we have a really close association here, and also on other sites excavated on these schemes, of burial being actually located very close by to the places of the living. And I think that is one of the really important motifs that brings us in a bit of a loop in a moment, as well as back to Carrownagark. So more and more in recent work on these kind of topics of ritual to do with the sphere of burial and death, with the sphere of what we might construe as kind of religious, understand as religious activities, we have realized more and more that we cannot make a clear division between one or the other in the past, but that everything is intertwined. Like Daniel showed us for the Roughcrohan Ridge as well, we have the burial monuments beside the big enclosure. We have here a settlement site which in its latest phase has a barrow monument, a burial monument on it. We have more examples of that where the barrow is directly beside a house. We have here Roughcrohan Mound, of course. I'm going to leave that. Gortnacrannagh, we also have this burial monument right beside these activity areas. The depositional sites with a lot of evidence for craft activity. So it would be a futile enterprise to try to identify it as either or. I think it's exactly this kind of intertwining and mixing of different realms of life that is one of the really kind of crucial and important aspects of the Iron Age at this, in this part of the world. Here, just another example of what burial sites in this region can look like, excavated also on the N5. Some beautiful blue glass beads, a ring ditch, and perhaps similar material or a similar date will emerge in the post-X4 Uring ditch at Gortnacrannagh. I'm very curious to hear what comes out of this. Objects are sometimes deposited in these burials. A very famous example here is Cara James, which is missing an R, my apologies. And you can see here some of also these little glass beads that actually formed part of the grave goods included in what in this instance was a large ring barrow with multiple burials at its inside, and excavated by Joseph Raftery in the 1940s. A good understanding, I think, of the chronology of these sites would be really helpful. So of different cremation deposits within the burial site of Gortnacrannagh, for example, or the other sites of the scheme, would help us to understand how all of this ties together, how the phases of burial activity relate to those of the other activities. That would be really, really useful. And just because, a quick step over to Fermanagh to show you one of the prime examples of a burial monument of Iron Age date in this country, the famous what is probably a Bronze Age or even Neolithic barrow surrounded by a number of small satellite mounds which have revealed themselves to be individual Iron Age burials. There were some in the mound as well, and included again an item, and this is an image that I took from Brian Scott's article. This little innocent looking fragment is actually part of a bronze mirror, like you see here, British example. So again, material culture that shows the connectivity and the wide-reaching, far-reaching kind of rich networks these people in this broader part of the but broadly part the same part of the country we're tied into. This theme of the mixing of the world of the living and the dead is really very nicely also traceable to a site on the border of Roscommon and Sligo, that's Loch Gara. When I say one site, I should say many sites. This is, you will see in a moment a map. There's a variety of different crannog sites that are actually located on this lake, but in the 1950s, during the drainage of the lake, a plethora of not only sites, but also objects came to light, including at least 4 human skulls. And I've never investigated where exactly in detail these were found, on the edges of the crannogs or in the open water, but we can see again here these same themes as Gortnacrannagh being recalled. And there was a project called the Islands of the Dead, which is working on this material, so it would be very interesting to see how the dating of this works out and relates to what you have at Gortnacrannagh. One site that is commonly understood to be a late Bronze Age site, and it certainly is in some of its phases, is the Crannog of Raftinon, excavated by Joseph Raftery in Loch Gara in the years following the drainage scheme. One of 2 crannogs he excavated. And this has also produced evidence for Iron Age settlement. So we have radiocarbon dates that place some of the so-called basket halves, but also stakes and other kind of constructional elements of one phase of the crannog into the Iron Age. So again, a landscape, and Christina Fredengrain's discovery program's work on some other smaller crannogs has likewise showed evidence for Iron Age crannog construction in this landscape. So very closely tied in or comparable with, I believe, the landscape you have kind of revealed a transect through here in Gortnacrannagh. So for me, thinking what I would like to see and find out is really, and that is what Eve talked about earlier as well, get this really detailed understanding of the archaeological sequence, how do all these different elements relate to each other, and how does it all relate to the paleoenvironmental record as well. That is going to be super exciting. We have a relatively early date in the 1st centuries AD through that art fragment. But the date of the idol itself places it in a period that in very many instances in paleo-environmental records in other parts of the country has been shown to be what's commonly called the Iron Age lull, which is where we have a distinct absence of activity or human impact in the landscape. And there's a lot of kind of chronological variation observable in this, and the dating of this kind of slump is not as straightforward as it seems, but it would be really interesting to see, does the idol, its erection, relate to this rich phase of Iron Age activity that you have here, or is it perhaps a marker of when things come into an end? Is it perhaps related to a phase of inactivity in this landscape suddenly? So I think chronological control resolution is going to be really the key to being able to drill into some of these and many other questions. So very excited and looking forward to hearing about your next phase of work.